We are talking The Dragon Unleashed, also known as Bring the Pain. This one is written and directed by Renee Perez. Now, Renee Perez is actually a fairly prolific B-movie writer-director. He's actually done a whole bunch of movies that I've recently reviewed. He was responsible for the Playing with Dolls series, the Dead and the Damned series. I've recently reviewed The Punished, which was his, and there was he's done a few films, that has this Robert Bronzy, who's the Charles Bronson lookalike. So here he is in a movie called The Dragon Unleashed, which appears to be more or less a remake of The Punished. Now, that was an awful action film, but this movie seems to be very, very similar in tone. We have a character played by Chase Bloomquist, who is this kind of masked government assassin who is a kind of a black ops. For some reason, he is operating out of this random barn in the middle of the country. Doesn't seem particularly kind of a strategic place for him to be holed up, but there you go, there it is. And he's kind of sent off to do various kind of missions that are, let's say, a little less than tasteful, killing kind of, a doctor who has discovered the cure for a disease, things like that, for reasons. Anyway, he happens to have this beautiful, perfect in every way, single woman that kind of lives next door to him, who he kind of strikes up this kind of romance with, and then starts to question his own morality and moral choices, and really decides he's going to kind of live a better life, and decides he is going to kind of like go against his orders when his orders are to kind of kill this innocent child for, again, reasons. And he kind of goes against his CO, played by John Schneider, who is probably the most recognisable name here, and ultimately just decides he's going to fight the government and become his own man. So there you go, the Dragon Unleashed. So he's kind of a bad guy in this, a masked bad guy, very similar to the movie The Punished, who has this kind of like crisis of conscience, really led by a third party who is this kind of innocent person, very much like The Punished. And The Punished, it was a young girl. Here it's a beautiful woman. So, he has an internal monologue. There's so much here really that is the same. I mean, the first third of this movie is the kind of the setup. The second part, the second third of this movie, the second act, is this kind of like the movie grinds to a halt as it has this kind of love story and all these kind of like, this woman is so unbelievably perfect, it's just beggars belief. And then the third act is just basically our action finale. So, let's talk about what works first of all. Renee Perez, I think, has an eye for cinematography. There is some very good use of tracking shots here, and I do feel Renee Perez can frame a good shot. And a lot of the movies that I've seen of his, I do feel he has a very shorthand behind the camera. And I feel that they are shot very well. The music, I actually quite like some of the the soundtrack here. Actually, a lot of it was done by Renee Perez himself and his band. Not all of the music, I will say, 'cause some of it just sounds like the typical backing music you'll get in a synthesizer. But there are some quite neat musical choices here that I did feel that worked. There are a few fight scenes here that I felt the choreography in regards to the martial arts were pretty good. And despite the fact that our main character is basically a complete clone of Deathstroke from the DC universe, he does look kind of cool. But what doesn't work? Well, so much. Let's discuss it. So, The Punished was not a good film. In fact, it was pretty terrible. And this movie, for some reason, is more or less the same story as that. Why remake it so soon, I don't know. Chase Bloomquist's assassin, he is so undeveloped. I mean, I don't necessarily blame the actor here, but you don't care because this guy does not have any type of personality. he's just so undeveloped. I mean, he doesn't do any acting until he actually kind of decides he's going to kind of go against his orders, and in that one sort of scene. So I don't necessarily blame the actor for this one, but you simply don't care because the character is essentially a blank slate who never seems to clear his wounds. He's constantly got like blood sort of coming off. Use a moist towelette or something. Why just have this kind of like this wet blood constantly kind of on you? Doesn't make sense. Why is there a government kind of like assassin held up in this barn all the time? Doesn't make sense. But there's more, we'll come on to that again. The plot, okay. So we're meant to believe that this guy is kind of just held up in this barn for no apparent reason. There's all the kind of the dastardly jobs. When he turns against his former employers, for some reason he visits this, we can only see with some black site that the government is held up in some sawmill. Why they were in a sawmill, I don't know. I mean, does this sawmill not use? Is it not used 9 till 5 in the day? You know, does no one notice the blood? It's ridiculous. And for Christ's sake, Renee Perez, I have to say this to you, stop using the same sets. I mean, this sawmill, I've seen it in about 5 films of in recent years. It's time to move on and have some different sets. I quite like the kind of some of the martial arts in this movie. I did feel there is some skilled martial artists here. However, it's undercut by ridiculous kind of sound effects that sound like straight from Street Fighter, which really do make it seem, and they don't always match up either. They're kind of like they're not particularly well dubbed. But the other action sequences involving guns. I mean, we have the CGI blood. There's a scene which is ridiculous where we have 2 people who both have machine guns. One actually has 2 machine guns, and they're both firing at each other, which seems like for about 5 minutes, neither of which are in cover, and just seem to be not hitting each other for ages. Why this guy decides he's going to go and go into this kind of like this sawmill where all these just happen to be random, which we can only assume soldiers are. There's no reason for it, to be honest with you. He just goes there. You know, it's just really, really silly. I mean, when we get to our middle section, our second act, which is involved with this kind of like our love story, I suppose, it's so cheesy. I mean, this girl is like, you know, literally perfect in every way. She's beautiful. She's super kind. She's like, you know, has this tragic backstory. She's happened to be single, and it's just so cheesy. So, what can I say? Can I recommend this film? It is stupidly cheesy. I feel Renee Perez he's done some fairly good horrors. I say good. I've enjoyed them, but they're not necessarily great. But maybe the action films I've seen of his don't seem to work as well. I feel you need to. My advice would be to Renee Perez you have some good eye in regards to directing, but you need to get someone else doing the writing here because scripting is not your strong suit. Someone else needs to do the script, and it can't be just carbon copies of the same film. There needs to be more to it. But I do feel Renee Perez can shoot a good action scene, and he has a good eye for cinematography. But it's just the storytelling aspects. So this film I can't really recommend, but it is strangely kind of like watchable in a weird kind of like overly cheesy and corny way. I'll give it a 4 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.